Some of the most successful companies in history became famous by doing one thing almost every business school warns against. They deliberately made less money on their main product. It sounds like a terrible strategy, yet it created billion-dollar empires. The strange part? Most people still don't notice the real product they were actually buying. And once you see it, you'll never look at business the same way again. Think about this. Imagine opening a store where your best-selling item barely makes a profit. Investors would probably call it a disaster. Competitors would laugh. Friends might tell you to quit. But what if losing a little today could lock customers into spending for years? That's the hidden strategy behind some of the world's biggest success stories, and it shouldn't have worked nearly as well as it did. One of the clearest examples came from printers. For years, companies sold printers at surprisingly low prices. Sometimes the hardware was barely profitable. The real money came later from ink cartridges. Customers happily took home what looked like a bargain, only to discover they needed expensive replacements over and over again. The printer wasn't the business, the ink was. Suddenly, that cheap printer looked very expensive over its lifetime. But this idea wasn't limited to printers. Then came game consoles. Companies like Sony and Microsoft have, at different times, sold consoles with very slim profit margins or even at a loss during launch periods. That sounds reckless until you realize what happened next. Every game sold, every online subscription, and every digital purchase generated revenue for years. Winning the customer once meant winning hundreds of future decisions. The console was simply the ticket into the ecosystem. Then smartphones took the strategy even further, but in reverse. Instead of selling the hardware cheaply, companies realized the real prize wasn't just the phone. It was keeping customers inside an entire digital world. Apps, cloud storage, music, movies, accessories, and subscriptions all became part of the experience. Leaving that ecosystem became harder every year, not because people were forced to stay, but because staying felt easier than starting over somewhere else. At this point, you might think the secret is simply selling something cheap first. But that's not the real lesson. Plenty of businesses have tried that and failed. The difference is whether the first product creates genuine long-term value. If customers feel trapped, they leave as soon as they can. If they keep receiving convenience, entertainment, or useful services, they stay willingly. That's a huge difference. One company demonstrated this better than almost anyone else: Amazon. At first, critics questioned why it kept sacrificing profits to grow faster. For years, the company focused on lower prices, faster delivery, and investing heavily in infrastructure instead of maximizing short-term earnings. Many believed the strategy couldn't last. Yet every warehouse, every delivery improvement, and every satisfied customer made the next purchase even more likely. The real asset wasn't a package. It was habit. And habits are incredibly valuable. Psychologists have long known that once people build routines, changing them requires effort. Businesses that reduce friction often beat businesses with better products. That's why one-click buying, automatic renewals, recommendation systems, and loyalty programs matter so much. They don't just make life easier. They quietly make competitors less attractive. Of course, this strategy has limits. If companies become too aggressive, customers notice. Expensive replacement parts, confusing subscriptions, or unfair pricing can damage trust. Regulators in several countries have also paid closer attention to practices that make switching services unnecessarily difficult. A clever strategy only works as long as customers believe they're still getting a fair deal. So why did this business strategy seem like it shouldn't have worked? Because it breaks one of the oldest assumptions in business, that every sale should make as much money as possible. Instead, these companies asked a different question. What if the first sale isn't the finish line? What if it's only the beginning of a relationship? That's the shift that changed entire industries. The companies that won weren't always selling the best product, or the cheapest product, or even the most profitable product. They were designing systems that customers wanted to return to again and again. And maybe that's the biggest business lesson of all. The most valuable thing a company can sell isn't a printer, a console, a phone, or a package. It's the next decision you haven't made yet. Once a business earns that, it's no longer competing for a single purchase. It's competing to become part of your everyday life. And that's a strategy that looked impossible. until it quietly reshaped the world.